Yo guys, what's going on? Invin here. Today I'm going to be bringing you guys a video on my top 5 war defense strategies in New World. Now these are going to be some of my most favorite strategies and some kind of plans that I always make during my defenses that have got me wins, but also things I've learned from when I've lost these defenses as well, what I could have done better. And I've kind of brought you guys my top 5 tips overall that can make you do a lot better in your defenses, and of course if you're attacking, just reverse these tips and use them in reverse. So the first one here is going to be your coordination, and it's going to be how you set up your team, so the composition of your defense. Now a lot of players like to have a lot of people on the walls, they like to have a lot of people kind of on the siege weapons, they like to have a lot of people spread out across the flags, and there's a whole host of different ideas that can work and do work. My favourite strategy for defense is to have a similar kind of mirrored to the attack side what you would have in terms of a setup. So I like to have at least 2 teams on the walls. That's to make sure that all of my turret siege defenses are manned at all times so that people can switch between them. Usually I like to put a couple of tanks up there so they can't be shot off of them as easily, a couple of healers up there to obviously keep on top of it, and the rest of the guys up there would be ranged DPS, so whether it's bows, muskets, most likely in this patch, but then also when we get the fire staff and ice gauntlet power back, those guys can go up there as well very effectively, and they tend to sit back, use the siege, and then generally have a team of 3 or 4 different groups that will be heading up the main point, and then have a team on each point, whether that's a full 5-man or just a couple of players on each of the points, regardless of whether the enemy is pushing it. That allows me to then see whether people are coming to, kind of backdoor or secret flank or whatever onto a separate point. Not only that, they're able to call rotations. If they see a lot of players moving around the back, they'll be able to call that for me, and I'll be able to get my main group to rotate in time to be able to counteract that. Now this is really important because it means you're playing on top of the game, you're not playing catch-up, which is where a lot of teams go wrong in defense, having to play catch-up when you're spreading your guys out, running backwards and forwards. That's where you'll start to lose points. If you're coordinated and ahead of the game, ahead of the curve, you're making the defensive play as they're making the attack instead of afterwards, you'll be in a lot better position. The main group will kind of attack head-on. I'll then like to have the remaining 1 or 2 teams, depending how I split these up, to be the flank group, so their entire purpose is to attack any enemy siege that goes down, any enemy backlines. So a lot of people have started to rotate the backlines now, but if there is still any enemies we go against where they're all kind of stood lined up, healers, mages, musket players, bow users, whatever, that are all in the back, we've got a team that just runs through those with great axes, warhammers, scatters them out, messes them up, and gets a real big advantage to less damage on the point, less heals on the point, all that good stuff, and our team can then concentrate on attacking and defending that zone. Now, obviously, if they do get into the fort, that's a whole different story, which we'll cover in a later point, but that's kind of like the outfield position that I like to play, but it's entirely up to you what you want to run. I would just recommend that you get a solid composition, make sure the teams have got enough balance of tanky players, also tanky damage dealers, so bruiser builds, then you've got your healers, your ranged DPS, and of course, ranged DPS generally are in light armor, so you need to make sure, as I say there, that you've got enough HP, enough resistances from your tanks and your bruisers to sort of compensate for that, so you've got a nice, solid team, particularly on defense. The second thing here is going to be making sure that you've got clear and concise communication with the squad if possible. Now, obviously, on our server, we have a Discord server set up so that all of our Covenant allies can join in. They get into the group call when they're invited to our wars or we're invited to theirs, and we kind of all get in together, have a little chat, and it's generally quite a nice environment. I'm aware on some servers this unfortunately can't be the case, but especially if it's going to be with your own company, try to get as many people into that group call as possible, and if that fails, try to use the army chat in-game, make use of the in-game party chat, as these can be really, really useful features. Now, one thing I would say, even if you are in a massive group call and you manage to get everybody into Discord by some miracle, you've managed to, sort it out, plan it out properly, or indeed you've got all your own people who are already in, what I would recommend you guys doing is muting up in the main call, and then also being talking to each other through party chat in-game whilst you are listening to the main caller's objectives, because you might get a call for, okay, I need the main Zerg to rotate to C now, and you guys could all be going that way, but group 6 might be one of the groups that's rotating. Whack your in-game icon and say, I've just seen a lot of people trying to come for our backline, let's rotate and hold those. So on your way there, you stop, you hold those guys with your gravity wells, then push into the site, and that can be a really, really crucial player that could save the entirety of that push. So it's things like that that are going to be super, super crucial. And as a leader, if you're watching this as kind of a leader or a war lead, getting these war leads into every single group, or somebody that can kind of at least have a bit of communication on the mic to tell people what needs to be done, is really, really essential, especially when they're brought in on the plan, they know what's going going on, and then they can communicate that to other players should there be any mix-up during the battle. The third thing here is to actually be adaptive. Now, this kind of obviously follows on from the first and second point with communication and composition, but also it just means that you want to making sure that you're adapting to how the enemy's playing. If, for example, they're pushing 1 point hard, consistently, all the time, you may be able to draw some of those players off the walls. If they're only using that A section of siege, let's say, you could draw some of those players down to maybe go for a siege flank at the side, take out the enemy siege. You could get the backline players to really go deep into their backline, force them back to the fort a little bit, so splits the enemy team half and half. You could have your front line pushing right into their backline, spread them out, and then fall back onto the point. Do all sorts of different things here which would break up the enemies, because the main point there, if they're all zerging, is you want to try and distract them, pull them away from one another, and try and break up the big brunt force, and that's how it's going to help you to be able to keep control of that point, particularly when the likelihood is you're going to be 30 to 35 players versus 50 odd, because you're obviously going to have groups on other points, groups on the walls, etc. So you want to drag these players out as much as possible. Now, obviously with adaptability then, if you see them split pushing, you already should have some players split, like I said, from the composition phase, but it's then about which groups would you be prepared to send over to a different side, which groups can hold their own, and again, obviously links massively in with the composition, but you would then need to send those groups across, get calls coming from both of those points, if possible, and kind of have a little defense strategy there where you've got people split up, working to the same objective, then they're calling out, okay, we've only got 10 here now, right, we've got another 25 back, and you can rotate backwards and forwards as needed there. And of course, they could go for a triple split, so you've always got to bear that in mind. You need to know which teams can rotate successfully, and which teams are kind of your reliable backup teams that can always hold a point should they need to as well. Now, of course, on top of this, in terms of adaptability following on with point 3, you're going to want to make sure that if you do, for example, lose a point outfield or all 3 points, you've then got a strategy for when you come inside the fort, when you're defending that. How are you going to take out enemy siege when you need to have most of your players in the fort? What are you going to do if the enemy pushes up to the battlements? What are you going to do if the enemy pushes onto the point? And that obviously is from the leader's perspective, but there is a kind of an essence there in the planning phase of a group and a guild and a company. How are you going to work this out? What do you want to do? And making sure you've got that backup plan is always a really, really good way to be on the road to successful adaptability during the war. Now, tip number 4 here is going to be focused around how the enemy actually takes it out. And for me, I always like to attack and start at point B. I would imagine a lot of players will do the same, but some companies will just take whichever flag they can get. Now, if they're doing an organized push, they can literally go 1, 2, 3, and that's absolutely fine. Doesn't make any odds to them, but generally B is the one you want to hold the most, because if you're rotating between A and B or B and C, it is much quicker than A and C, and it spreads out your forces a lot less, meaning that you can rotate people very, very quickly if you get overpowered at one flag, rather than running the whole course of the map to then have a split push take the other flag, etc. And this can be really, really annoying. So by priority on defense would always be the B flag. Try to hold that one down for as long as you physically can, as it is going to put you at a good stead. But again, linking back to the adaptability point, if for whatever reason it does fall and you have to split your forces up, make sure you've got a plan there, make sure you've got kind of teams in place, and also don't worry about it, just go with the flow of the match. Make sure you guys have got haste pots that can rotate around, and it should still go very, very smoothly, providing that you've got good communication and good teamwork in there. And finally here, I just wanted to touch on the 5th and final point, being about fort defense. If they actually capture all 3 points and come inside the fort, what should you be doing? Well, make use of the, obviously, if you've got the max level placements, cannons or whatever that are inside, usually cannons are the best choice of placement here. Use those to attack the enemies. People generally neglect and forget about those cannons once the enemy breaches the wall. On top of this, what you can do is use the battlements to your advantage, but be aware it will drag players up there. Now, when players are up there, they can drop onto the flag, they can drop onto spawn points, drop onto people in the shops, so you do need to be aware that if they get height advantage, that can be bad. So I generally like to put up there some mages, especially ice mages, to slow them down if they do push up, and then the melee guys can sandwich that. But be aware of that. Of course, you have got your spawn points in there, so wherever you're spawning, the enemies can be right on top of you, so be prepared to fight as soon as you spawn in. And with that, be prepared to be able to throw down a lot of people onto the point should the enemy suddenly go for a big rush. Now, one main thing that I see a lot of people not doing when people push the actual fort point is the enemy team or the attacking team would have a lot of siege out of maybe 1 or 2 of the doors, firing onto the point, getting some extra support. That's good. That means their team is split up. You want ideally a team of 5 or a team of 10 maybe split up. They go out and take out those cannons, even if you're all on the point, just so that you get less pressure, kills off some of their players, gets them on respawn timers, and then those teams, once they've completed that mission, can collapse back inside onto the point and help you clear up that point to get the maximum cap back up to your side, so it's all blue again, which is really, really good. And often when people are defending, they don't think about having, you know, falls and lines of people. So maybe you'll have an initial group that contests it, people fight in, trying to pick off any casters, any healers as normal. Then they'll push in, and then a final group that's still fighting, and then they push in as a last resort. And that way you've always got groups of people that can push into the point, add more pressure from your side. You've also got people always attacking their backline, casters, healers, whatever, siege weapons, and you've also got people who can collapse in and sandwich that last point there to make sure that you get a lot of their respawn timers up, as once you do break into the fort, generally you're on 45-second timers, and that is going to be what wins you the war there, or indeed loses you the war if all of your players get on respawn timers as well. So hopefully you guys have found this video useful, nice little insight into how defense works and some tips and tricks on how you could actually start to win a few more defenses of your own. If there is any tips or tricks for defense that you think are really, really good that I've missed out from this video, please do drop them in the comments below. That'd be amazing to kind of share some of the best tips and tricks around the community together here. Other than that, guys, if you are new to the channel, please do make sure you drop a subscribe, as I do upload every single day, and I would love to have you here as part of my channel community. If you did enjoy today's video, please do make sure you drop a like on it down below, as it really does help support my content here on the channel. And other than that, as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. Take care and peace.